My family and I spend almost as much time outdoors as we do indoors. And since we're selling the house and traveling in the van full time for the next year, we're going to be doing that even more. And what that means is we're going to have to get rid of some of these water bottles. And as we've been thinking about and deciding which ones we'll take and which ones we'll leave behind, it's gotten into some discussions about the pros and cons. And so I thought before they're all gone, I'd make a video about what we've learned about HydroFlasks and similar vacuum sealed water bottles, what we think is valuable, what we think is overhyped. And I don't know, maybe this is interesting to somebody who's nerdy about the outdoors and water bottles. So before you judge me too harshly for having so many of these water bottles, I would like to point out that I haven't purchased any of them new. We purchased all of them used from almost all from a local used consignment shop that sells outdoor gear here in Chattanooga called Four Bridges. And so this 40 ounce, they all have lids, I just don't have them all here. This 40 ounce cost us like $14 or $15. And these 32-ounce ones cost about $10. So it's still over $100 in water bottles, but it's not like $400 in water bottles. And we do a lot of hiking and rock climbing and mountain biking and kayaking. And in the summer here in Chattanooga, it can get into the high 90s and very high humidity. And we have found as a family that having ice cold water can really go a long way in keeping up the stamina and the energy level of our family, um, especially since we have some little kids, 7, 9, and 11 years old. Okay, so anyway, that's the backdrop to why we have so many of these. As I mentioned, we're selling our house and going on the road full time, so we're going to get rid of a lot of these, but we're going to keep a couple, and that got me thinking about maybe what I could share with some water bottle nerd about whether or not these things are worth it. Um, so maybe I'll just say a couple conclusionary statements first, so you don't have to watch this whole thing if you're not interested. So what I would conclude is that they are big, heavy, expensive, and work really well. Um, I would also conclude that they are not very durable, depending on your definition of durability. So they all have quite a lot of damage to the bottoms. Now, we didn't do this damage. As I mentioned, we bought these all used. I did that one. Long story, but I did that one. Um, and so I would say maybe you need to define durability in two tiers. So let's say macro level durability, meaning they take a beating and they keep doing what they're supposed to do. In that sense, they're durable because they have none of them have leaked and all of them have kept their vacuum sealed. Micro durability, let's say, would be like scratches and things like that. But the bigger issue is these dents. They all are dented, and so none of them quite sit flat. They all kind of weeble wobble, and that's not something that you'll find like with a Nalgene. A plastic Nalgene really doesn't suffer that type of micro level durability issues where the softer plastic ones like this as well as the hard plastic ones, they really don't get beat up to the point where they won't stand up anymore. So yeah, anyway, so I like them. It's not a criticism of them. The other big conclusion that I would make is that you really don't need to buy the Hydro Flask brand. We have several other. This is from IKEA. I'm not sure, and I've not taken precise measurements, but subjectively, the off-brand vacuum flasks do not have a significant performance deviation compared to the Hydro Flask ones. And in many cases, the lids fit and transfer. And in some cases, I think the lid design from the off-brand ones is actually superior. So Hydro Flask, they have, this is kind of the standard cap. Um, this actually holds up quite well in the long haul. I've been pretty impressed that this doesn't tear off, but the only way to get a drink is to take this thing off and then you have two items in your hands. And it's hard to do that. Sometimes your hands are full And this, as an example, is a nice alternative where you can still take it off and fill it with ice, but you still have some sort of a clip, but then you also have the ability to drink. And that's pretty useful when you're walking. It's hard to drink from a really wide mouth container. When you're walking or hiking a lot, you tend to have to stop. And as I mentioned, in many cases, if you're in the middle of a rock climb, it's nice to be able to drink without having two separate objects that require two separate hands. So HydroFlask does have some things like this where you just flip up and get a drink, and that works good. But they really don't have anything in this category where you have a tethered cap. Basically, all of their one-handed deals are pretty much with a straw of some sort. So yeah, I would say vacuum flasks, big, heavy, expensive, but they work, and off-brand ones work really good as well. So one improvement to the Hydro Flask in terms of durability is these Stanley flasks. We've had this one now 3 years. You can see it has quite a lot of dings and scratches. The bottom has held up quite a bit better. Still a little bit of damage, but this bottom stainless steel cap goes a long way in keeping the bottom from getting damaged. And you do see there's some dents to the top here. We've been fairly abusive of this, I suppose. The other thing is I did a test. I put equal amounts of boiling water in this and in this. And this had approximately 20% better performance in terms of keeping something hot. And I suspect there's two reasons for that. The first reason is this cap compared to this cap. So basically, when it comes to thermal isolation, distance is basically king. And this distance is so much greater than this distance, especially since the bottle sits upright and heat rises. There's a lot of heat that wants to exit through the capped area, and the Stanley does a better job in that. The other thing is, and I've not taken measurements, but wall thickness. So basically, the way that these things stay hot is that there's an inner and an outer chamber, of course, this outer chamber, and then the inner chamber where the liquid sits. And the distance, the gap, the air gap between those two is one factor, as well as how deep into a vacuum or how close to a perfect vacuum the vacuum flask has been pulled. And I don't know how to measure that, and I don't think those details are published. But the wall thickness or the gap, the air gap on this, is subjectively quite a bit bigger when I put my fingers in there and I feel the distance between inner wall and outer wall compared to something like this. And of course, the downside to that is that in order to carry 22 ounces of liquid, this bottle ends up being quite large, even though it only holds 22 ounces. So to that point, I've taken some measurements, and I've used a scale that goes down to grams, and I've taken a few measurements to make a comparison between a 32-ounce Nalgene and a 32-ounce Hydro Flask, and really just to show the difference. As an engineer, I have long realized that questions like which water bottle is best is quite a stupid question. And most engineers will respond to a question like that with the answer, it depends. And I think that that's a really good way to think of things, is that this water bottle is far superior in some scenarios, and this water bottle is far superior in some scenarios. And then you have to ask yourself the question realistically, what scenario will you primarily be in, and do the benefits of each make it worth it for you? So, okay, so first thing, basically these Nalgene's cost around 13 bucks, and these Hydro Flasks cost around 32. So this is 40% the cost of this. So you could have two of these and some spare change, and just compared to the price of one. So this is quite a bit more expensive, more than twice the cost. Okay, so it's expensive. Second thing is that it's bigger. I took measurements of the OD and the length here, or the height, as well as this, and this one is 84% the size of this one. So if you start carrying a lot of these in your backpack and physical space and size become a constraint, then you'll carry a lot more water, well, about 15% more water with this than with this. And that's actually a factor for my family because we'll sometimes go on a hike where we'll carry 2 or 3, we'll carry 80 to 100 ounces of water each because we'll be gone all day. Climbing is a good example of that. And when you start to pack away that much water, you really do start to sort of sense subjectively how much more you can get in your bag with something like this compared to this. The next thing is weight. So this weighs 15.8 ounces, this weighs 3.8. So this weighs 24% of this. So if you are going on any sort of a long distance hike where weight starts to matter to you, basically you can have 4 of these for the weight of 1 of these. And that's why I say that the HydroFlasks are heavy, big, expensive, and they work. So the number that I don't have is how much cooler a HydroFlask will keep your water when you ice it. But subjectively, I can say that the influence is very significant. If you put a ton of ice in a water bottle like this, you can maintain ice levels throughout most of the day, depending on where you're at, but you'll have a ton of condensation and sweating. And depending on what else is in your bag, that can create a problem. We have homework in our bags for our kids because we homeschool. We have clothing in our bags. And so the sweating and condensation can create kind of a real problem. Plus, there's something just kind of aggravating about all of your stuff getting wet. And you may or may not be able to get over that, but that's a factor. And so what's nice is these things never sweat. You can completely fill them with ice, and then they still don't sweat at all inside your bag. So the other attribute to these, which can be a little bit annoying, is I have overfilled these with ice. Specifically, this big green one I'll take with me rock climbing, so I'll completely fill it with ice. And then when I go to get a drink, it's freezing cold. But eventually I drink all the water and there's ice left in here. And it might sound funny, but it's hard to get that ice to melt. I've left the cap off and I've put this in the sun, but because this is such a good insulator, it takes quite a long time for that ice to finally melt. And so you run into a scenario where you have liquid with you. Well, you don't have liquid, you have water with you, but you can't consume it because it's all iced up. So it takes a little bit of sort of fine tuning when you use one of these. You know, as an example, in my case, our family might go on a 1 mile hike and then rock climb for 5 hours and then return on a 1 mile hike. And in really hot days, water planning can be quite important. And we actually take kind of sometimes a crazy amount of time to think about and plan just how much water we want to have because it all adds up in terms of weight as well. And we're carrying 2 ropes and tons of carabiners and harnesses and rock climbing shoes and food and coffee. So it all becomes kind of quite significant. So there's that to consider as well. What I have found is that if I'm doing outdoor activities in like the 80s, anywhere from like basically anything below like 80 degrees, maybe below 75 degrees, depending on if it's sunny, then I find myself not wanting to take this and I'll just take this. The other thing that I find is like if you go backpacking, you don't get the privilege of having iced water. You're always just drinking water at whatever temperature it comes out of the creek or whatever it's been sitting at. And so, depending on the strenuous level of your activity, your standards begin to change. So, when you're absolutely exhausted and you've been backpacking for ages, then you're just extremely grateful to have any water at all. And if you're just going on a short day hike and you're sipping coffee along the way and you're eating sandwiches, then you kind of have this higher standard of living and you really want iced water. Um, so that's what's also kind of interesting. Andrew Skirka, my favorite backpacker, he says, hunger is the best seasoning. That is to say, the hungrier you are, the less important it is that your food tastes good. And I would say in the same way, like misery is the best ice. The more and more miserable you are, you'll drink scalding hot water, and you'll be super grateful for it. So One other thing that might be worth mentioning, someone gave us this little one. This is like 12 ounces. Um, and I thought that I might just drink like a single cup of coffee out of it, but I found that the coffee really has a bad taste to it when you drink it out of this stainless steel lipped thing. So I don't know how much of a difference that makes for other people, but what we use this for is coffee creamer. So we will bring one or two of these filled with black coffee, and then we'll bring this filled with half and half. And it does a really good job keeping the half and half cool and keeping it from curdling or whatever going bad. Um, and so that's one application of these small ones. I actually wish they made an even smaller one. But anyway, that's a really good application for these little guys is coffee creamer. And that's, I'm extremely grateful for this. I mean, we use this all the time. And otherwise we would have milk going bad all the time. Um, Last thing, we bought this big one. This is 64 ounces. And one thing I will say is because the weight of these Nalgene's is not quite negligible, but almost negligible, 3.8 ounces. If you want to take, 120 ounces of water, then you can just grab 4 Nalgene's, and you have an accumulation of weight, 3.8 ounces times 4 to carry all of that water. But you really can't do the same thing with these. If you want to take 128 ounces of water, taking 4 of these is really just kind of almost ridiculous, because now you have 4 pounds of material that you're bringing in order to carry that. And so one thing that you can do to improve that is this. Maybe one way to put it would be to say that for 24 ounces, for 24 ounces of weight, you can carry 64 ounces of fluid, whereas this takes 16 ounces to carry 32 ounces of fluid. So basically, if you took 2 of these, you'd be at 32 ounces, whereas if you take this, you're only at 24 ounces, and yet 2 of these and this will carry the same amount of water. Although I just remembered I forgot the lid in the weight. But the point is, you can get more efficient weight to water carrying ratios if you buy these bigger ones. And I think this might be the biggest one that they make, but we actually use this quite a lot. It's quite ungainly, to drink from, especially the kids, but it acts as a good reservoir from which we can fill other ones. So, all right, well, yeah, that was almost 20 minutes of talking about HydroFlasks and Nalgene's. Maybe I'll close by saying what we're going to do as a family on this long trip that we have coming up is basically we're going to each bring something like an Nalgene, probably 32 ounces, maybe the taller 48 ounce, and then we're each going to bring a Hydro Flask. And so on really, really hot days, like in Arches, Utah, we'll probably have both of these in a backpack each, and we'll drink that one first before it gets too hot, and then we'll be grateful for the iced one later. Of course, on the road, ice is a little bit harder to find anyhow. But then when you get into colder climates like Grand Tetons, ice just becomes unimportant. And so this one will probably stay in the car. This one will go in the backpack with us. And you also tend to not consume as much water in colder climates like that because you're not sweating as much. So we're probably going to bring one of each and kind of mix and match, because they both have value and they both have areas in which they shine. And then I think they each have areas where they really fail. And I think that's what's maybe the most important thing to say is when something is very successfully marketed, like these Hydro Flasks. I think that's what Hydro Flasks does best, is marketing and color schemes and getting you excited about a beautiful water bottle. They do a little better job than Nalgene, I think. Yeah, when something is marketed, they often tout what it can do. It can keep hot things hot this long, cold things cold this long. But then what they don't do is they don't show you what you begin to lose. And what you begin to lose is weight and space, and to a more obvious extent, costs. And so anyway, maybe this was helpful for someone who is getting ready to spend a bunch of money on water bottles for their family. All right, well, that's it. I hope that was interesting. And if not, just give this thing a thumbs down so I know not to waste my time with water bottle YouTube videos. In the meantime, take care, folks. Get out there, have an adventure. God bless you.